session 4 on human rights violations around the world. Hindu organizations actively addressing the issues. We have a very distinguished chairperson for this session. It's Professor Ved Nandaji. He has taught at the University of Denver Sturm College of Law since 1965. In addition to his scholarly achievements, he is significantly involved in the global international law community, including leadership positions in the World Jurist Association, American Society of International Law, United States Institute of Human Rights, American Law Institute, and the American Bar Association. His alumni and friends have established a Ved Nanda Scholarship. He has received numerous national and international awards. He is widely published in law journals and national magazines and has been a distinguished visiting professor. Professor Ved Nandaji.
Abhijit, you are very kind. Thank you very much. Dattaji, thanks very much for not leaving enough time for us to begin on time. No. That session was absolutely amazing. It was mesmerizing, and issues raised were very important. So, in all seriousness, it couldn't be done easily and without more time to be given to it so that justice could be done to it. Anyway, this is a session on human rights, and especially about the human rights movement that, as you recall, began after the Second World War, and primarily from the West. And the reason simply was very obvious, that the atrocities committed in the Second World War by the Nazis were such that the immediately feeling was that we ought to have some kind of change in the system, that those who commit human rights violations at home, they are likely to be international pariahs, that human rights and international peace and security, they are closely intertwined. And the point simply was that after the Second World War, as a new organization was created, the United Nations, the thought simply was that human rights ought to be at the forefront, and they ought to be as integral part of the UN Charter. Human rights were distorted by the West, and I'll give a small context, short context to it in a few minutes, but I do not want to take the time from my colleagues. And as a matter of fact, you would probably be very pleased to hear them. These are the people who have, in the last many years, championed the cause of human rights of Hindus. In the one context, they began with minorities, and all minorities, but Hindus in Bangladesh, Hindus in Pakistan, Hindus in many parts of the world that have been persecuted, they took their cause. And so these two organizations, one in Europe, one in the United States, have taken the enormous task of putting on the international agenda the human rights of Hindus. And when we talk about human rights, as I said, I'll provide the context, and the context, I should let you know what the context is. The context is that human rights movement, not human rights itself, but that human rights movement that was distorted by the West, we in Bharat simply ignored it in a sense, because we felt that probably Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, all that they do is malign India, malign Bharat, about Kashmir, about other places, and so we did not pay a great deal of attention to the movement. And later on, I'll provide the context as to why, at the present time, it's absolutely imperative that not simply these individuals, not simply these two organizations, and these are the organizations whose leaders themselves, out of their own pockets, spend thousands upon thousands of dollars of their own in order to get this work done because it has to be done. And what are those human rights? They are human rights, civil and political rights, economic, social, and cultural rights, rights of people to live in human dignity, that Hindus in many parts of the world are persecuted, are not given that kind of privilege. That is an essential part of inherent right of a person as a human being. Not that that right is given by any charter, not that that right is given by any constitution. That is inherent. That is my right as an individual. That is what we said in our own, yesterday we kept hearing it, today we kept hearing it, values that Bharat has, Hindus that taught from the very beginning, the very essence of humanism. So I'll say a few words about that, but I think the point simply is that we ought to listen to those people who have taken time, who have put in their own resources, time and effort, and have done human tasks in order to protect the rights of Hindus all around the world. The very first person that I'm going to introduce to you is Shri Shraddhanand Seetalji. In the middle of Europe, capital of all those tribunals, world tribunals, International Criminal Court, International Court of Justice, war crimes tribunals for Yugoslavia, the tribunal on Sierra Leone, and a capital where from the very beginning people talked about peace and war. That is The Hague, and he has started this program in The Hague, Global Human Rights Defense. Netherlands is the rule of law capital, that's where it is. And what is it? It's an international human rights organization with the objective of promoting human rights, not simply promoting them, but protecting human rights. Promoting is to create awareness, and he does. As the chair, and I have seen his work, I have gone to see the operation. Swami Vijnananandji had from the very beginning been working with him, and I'm very delighted to say to you that that is one organization that as I went there, talked with them, found that passion, found that dedication, found that fire, that jwala that is there, Jagti Jwala. And that is what Sheetalji is. And the objective is promoting, protecting human rights and violations that have victimized relatively large populations. 2012, he was awarded the Siddhartha National Award for Global Public Service. Much more that I can say about him, but he is the one who ought to talk about what he does. He has got about 15 people working with him from all over the world, and after talking with a couple of them, I felt that he is one who is able to transfer, able to translate his own jwala, his own dedication to his workers, who also work as selflessly as he does. And I'm delighted to present him to you. Kindly welcome him, Mr. Sheetal.
Namaste. Thank you, Professor Vijnananandji. I was very pleased when I saw your name that you will be the chairperson, because when we talk about Manavadhikar, means that you need to understand the topic. And as I'm not a spiritual person, but I believe that my dharma is also one important thing, that is Manavadhikar. And Manavadhikar to protect our dharma, our Hindus all over the world. Can I have the next slide, please? The global human right defense. The reason we are global human right defense and not global Hindu human right defense, because we collect all the human rights violation of minorities, especially on Hindus. If you call it Hindu human rights, then it will be biased in the West. We have to fight with the same technology that all other organizations is doing that against us. So that's why we call it global human rights defense. Our work is based on the Dharma. My inspiration is from the Dharma. But I am not a religious person. I believe in Bhagwan. I pray to him, but I not going so frequently to mandir because I think my work is somewhere else. My work is in the field where we defend our Hindu society, where we defend our Hindu brothers and sisters, where we prevent that our children is not raped by others because they are Hindus. We based in The Hague. This is my staff, all paid staff. We believe that in Hindu human rights or human rights, you cannot do it in part-time, you cannot do it after you finish your work. This is a full-time job. Means that our victims is being done by full-time rapists. They paid by organizations to destroy our religion, our society. That's why we pay these people. We pay also our people who work for us in the South Asia, because you cannot ask people to come and work for free. Human rights is a serious matter, so you need to get it seriously and professionality. We have all nationality in our organizations, and as a strategy, we always put Western people to defend human rights in Bangladesh and Pakistan. What our aim is to protect human rights, especially minorities. In the minority section, we focus mainly on women's rights and children. Our operations is in South Asia. The country we are focusing mainly is Pakistan, Bangladesh, partly a little bit on Sri Lanka and Nepal. Also, we have some projects in India regarding trafficking. We have 3 pillars. We want to make it clear. One is human rights monitoring and efficacy. Why? Because we need to collect data. We need to have the real data on the right place. What has happened that so many human rights violations happened in the past in Bangladesh and Pakistan. We don't have the data. Who, when, what? Who done it? Where? Do you have evidence? Police report, pictures, and is there any report on international organization? Advocacy means that we have to start a case in the country itself, not somewhere else. Also, lobby and network means in the European Union, UN, and all other organizations. We work together with Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, but still we have to defend these cases also by ourselves. So lobby and advocacy is most important work in the human rights field, because mainly human rights is being declared after, as Professor Vednanda said, after the Second World War. See, it's invented by the West. So we have to play the same game as they want. So we need to see that our lobby and network have to be done in European Union and in the US and the UN. Because forget it that India will do something for the human rights violation in Bangladesh or Pakistan. All two these people are waiting for that. It's not going to happen. It's going to happen from outside. That's why we have to mobilize those people here in India and outside India. Human rights education. It's very important that you educate these people who are working in Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka. What is human right? What is their right? What is the treaty that the country have signed? What kind of right they can demand from their country? If they don't know that, they cannot. So we want all our defenders who work for us have a proper education on human rights. We don't build schools, we only see that there's facility to get human rights education in the region and in our country. The other part was humanitarian aid. Why we do that? Very important. Mainly the atrocities in Bangladesh is gang rape. Very common to minority Hindu girls. We can make the best report there is, 20 pages, and we can send it all over the world. And many Hindus will send us a mail, oh, that is bad. But that's the only reaction we get, because email is the cheapest way to support us. You can better, don't send me anything, but don't send us this kind of mails, because it's not going to help us. What we do, to get this lady, this girl to medical treatment, After medical treatment, safe housing. After safe housing, we have to see that the family is safe. Then we start a legal case in the same country. That was failed for the last 20 years, never happened in these countries, even not in Bangladesh and Pakistan. So that means that legal aid is very important for these people. Otherwise, these people migrate to India and anywhere else, or played suicide. Mainly a lot of girls who's been gang raped played suicide. It could be our children. If we are bad luck, we will born in India, we are born in Bangladesh or Pakistan. Typical violations in, can I have the line? In human rights and minority is torture, killing, degrading, physical assault, abduction, forced marriage in the name of their law, attacks on our religious temples, destroying of the cultural heritage. One, you don't have a cultural heritage. One, the temples is destroyed, means that there is no existence of Hindus anymore. It's a technique that started long time ago. If you destroy their heritage, means that then you destroy the culture, you destroy the belief of people. And in fact, rape is one of the major tools to break down the society. And as my staff is traveling frequently to Bangladesh and Pakistan, I feel personally that these people are the right Hindus. Due to all this problem they have, due to all these attacks, Swamiji know that these are the Hindus. We have a luxurious life. We can build big temples in US, everywhere, and we are proud of it. But these people stay there, they maintain Hindu. These are the Hindus. And I salute you, sir, because these people survive and they will survive. And we as a community, we fail. We Hindu community fail in all lines. We never go and protect these people. I don't want you to become terrorists. I don't want you to go and kill people. But at least 1 minute think about these people. Go on the street. Organize something. One day no temple. Just talk about the people, what is happening with the Hindus in the world. I think Bhagwan will forgive you not doing one-day prayer or puja. I think any Bhagavad Gita, Ramayana, Bhagwan had never built a temple. He always fight for the goodness, protection of people. We build temples, we build societies and all these things. And we create the things. So, Hindus, we fail. We are Aryaputra, but I don't know where the Arya went. We have only, I'm a Bihari. We said, जो गरम खून है ना वो ठंडा हो गया उसका गरम करने के समय लगेगा. I just want to say, just look at the figures, facts and figures. If partition 30% of Hindus and now almost 1.2%, where the Hindus gone to disappeared? No, converted, or they are not practicing Hinduism, or they flee to India or any other countries. What is happening is that they destroy all their facilities, land grabbing and sexual insult. So minorities facing a lot of problems, especially Hindus. And Hindus, just my secretary is just back from Bangladesh. And again, Hindus in Pakistan, Bangladesh are the worst organized, less facilities than any other religious minority group like Christians. Their money and the Vatican and their society, at least the Christian is fulfilling their dharma. They're supporting their minorities. They're supporting their facilities. If you kill one Christian in Bangladesh, European Union will ask questions, the Dutch government will ask questions. You kill 3,000 Hindu and even no Hindu will ask questions. If you put it in a scale, Hindus are down and one white people is equal like 300 people, Hindus. And in fact, this is not a topic to discuss on 50 minutes or 10 minutes or 2 minutes. You can explain it in 1 minute, but I think for India, for this community, we need at least half an hour to explain. So this is the thing that is happening all the time, destruction of cultural heritage. And this morning, I got a picture of a Hanuman temple destroyed in Pakistan, and it's happening daily. We destroy one mosque in Bharat, and I would respect it was not done, because at that time, they destroyed more than 300 temples all over India, over Bangladesh, Pakistan. Know that one mosque that we destroyed again more than 3,000 temples in India, Pakistan. And who is talking about, the whole West talking about the mosque that is destroyed, not about the 3,000 temples that is destroyed. That is our weakness. We don't care. We only care that what we are. See, this is a Hindu World Conference, but every Hindu has his own world. Come out of the world and let's unite. I think we have to call it World Universe Conference, because we Hindu have three things. One, we are smart. Secondly, we are one of the most, what we call secular people. And third is, we are the one that we want to make the whole world family. I think let's make first the Hindu one family. Then think about the other people. Because once we united, then we know what we are doing. I'm sorry that I could not go to all the sheets, but I'm talking from my heart. Human rights work is very depressing. If you get an email that a girl from 3 years has been raped, a mother has been raped in front of the father because they are Hindus, I cannot sleep. If you guys can sleep, आप लोगों में माता पिता और भाई बहन, I think then you will be killing this person. But these people don't have rights. When they go to the police, then the police rape these Hindu girls again. And if somebody tell me that is good in Bangladesh or Pakistan, then send them please to me. I will show him every corner. Thank you very much. Namaste.
You can feel the anguish in his voice. You can feel the anguish and pain in Sheetalji's heart. And Sheetalji, I want you to know that the blood is not cold. Look at this room. This shows you not simply the interest, but shows you the care. People do care. I think the point simply is for us to know how to translate that care into action that can be effective. Sheetalji mentioned Swamiji. Swamiji and I were together. We have gone to Congress. I have spoken at the US Congress about Bangladesh in about 8 or 10 meetings with Congress people and with session from Bangladeshi Hindus. We have been from Montreal to Toronto to New York to Washington, all over the country in the United States talking about it and putting pressure upon the government in order to take some action on it. I remember when I, forgive my personal reference, it's simply in order to make a point, I was the president of the World Jurist Association. 145 countries, judges, lawyers, law professors, and we met at one conference where the Bangladesh Chief Justice was there, sitting in front of me and talking about the rule of law. And I was chairing the session. And then I invited him to come and talk about the Hindu minority in Bangladesh and the way they have been treated. And I mentioned to him the numbers, from 31% to 9%. And Swamiji just gave me, and I wanted him to read it, but I'll read it. Human Rights Group has stated that during 2007 to 2014, 1,699 temples were demolished. 5,050 minority families forcefully displaced from their own land and properties. Hundreds forcefully converted to Islam. 302 killed, and all those kind of things. I don't want to go into all those graphic details. But the point simply is that it has happened many places. I do not believe, and I know you do not believe, in simply self-flagellation. We don't want to do that. I think there is plenty of misery to go around, and we can't talk about that all the time. But at the same time, we do need to see what effective action can be taken. One American is beheaded and shouldn't be, but the entire country is in a rage. President goes on not once, but several times before the cameras talking about it. We'll go after the person who did it. We'll go after the organization that did it. We'll go after the country that might have given some kind of assistance to those who did it. That, I think, is the effective response that needs to be done in this country as well. To Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji, to everybody else, we have given these things about what has happened in those countries. And obviously there are constraints. Bharat did not have, for a long period of time, that kind of clout in the international arena. Today, for the first time, we are going to have that clout, and I hope that today, for the first time again, in many, 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 many years, with that self-confidence, with that self-esteem, that we can tell the entire world that no longer can we tolerate those things that have been going on for years and years in this country, in the world. I'll say a couple words again after the next speaker, but I'm very proud to present to you another Hindu organization that in the United States, just in 10 years, had not just made a ripple, but has made a wave, and a very strong wave. Because last year at their 10th anniversary, I was in Washington, and they had the meeting in order to celebrate the 10th anniversary in the Capitol and on the Hill in Washington, and brought in a dozen plus Congress people and senators. And a senator stood up and said to the Hindu American Foundation, "I'm your servant. I'll fight for Hindu cause." And my chest grew with pride to see that these young people, with their own dedication, have done something that needs to be done, needed to be done, must be done. And that is that about Hindus, about Hindu plight, but about what Hindus can do and can achieve, given a glimpse of it in the last 10 years. And I'm very, very proud of that. Meher Maghani and the directors, and Meher Maghani was a Swayamsevak, remains one, worked very closely in Sangh, and obviously inspired by that. And the point that I'm going to make is that obviously Sangh has said that and believes it, and Hindu organizations and institutions believe it, that people who have been inspired by those values and thoughts ought to go as karma yogis and do it on their own. And that's absolutely important, and we do it. But I think we need to see Vishwa Hindu Parishad, Sangh, other organizations, how to institutionally, not individuals, but how to institutionally, we can find a way to see that on these causes that matter, on these issues that are critical to this society, these values and issues that make or break any society, and in Hindus today, for the first time, that rejuvenation, that awakening that we see, we need to tap that. And I think we'll probably do that. Who the heck am I to tell the organization? I'm organization's little minion and servant, and do anything that the organization will tell me. But at the same time, as an institution, as an organization, we need strategically to think how these people who spending their own resources and money do all that kind of work, how we can put that momentum into force that can shake the world, and it will. And so let me give you, Meher Mekhani could not come, but Samir Kalra, who has been for many, many years working as director, senior human rights fellow in the Hindu American Foundation. He is the one who leads the human rights advocacy effort for the foundation. He has done several reports, and if you haven't seen them, I'm going to request you and I'm going to ask Swami Vijnananandji to send to all the delegates the email address, web address of both these organizations, and to see the kind of reports that they have done, see the kind of advocacy that they have done, and you'll be as proud as I am of the efforts that they have undertaken. So he is the one who has submitted written testimony to congressional hearings. He also spearheads the foundation's government outreach, and that outreach has today borne efforts, results, efforts that have succeeded. So kindly join me in welcoming Samir Khan.
Thank you very much, Vedji, for the kind introduction, and namaste to everyone here today. It's my honor and privilege to be speaking with all of you here on such an important occasion and such an important gathering and such a critical topic. My colleague here, Sri Sadanand Sito, gave a very passionate and fiery speech about the human rights work that they do, and I have great admiration for the work that GHRD does. And he gave a good summary of the work they do on the ground in countries such as Pakistan and Bangladesh. What I like to focus on is a little bit different aspect of it, and that is the advocacy work in the country that I live in and our organization is in, which is the US, as the Hindu American Foundation. So just to give you just a little bit about the Hindu American Foundation, we are a nonprofit advocacy organization that provides a voice for the more than 3 million Hindu Americans. We educate the public about Hinduism, speak out about issues affecting Hindus worldwide, and we focus on human and civil rights, public policy, media, academia, and interfaith relations. Human rights advocacy is one of the key aspects of the work that we do, and I just want to share a small story with you, a short story with you as to the importance of the advocacy work that needs to be done. About 10 years ago, Vedji referred to the organization being around for a little over 10 years. 10 years ago, when we walked the halls of Congress in the most powerful capital of the world, we went and we presented ourselves as the Hindu American Foundation. We had a number of meetings with senators, congressmen, and we told them that we represent the Hindu American community. And during one of those meetings, one of my colleagues, when he described that he represents the Hindu American community, he was asked, "So are you a Sunni or a Shia?" So that just tells you the level of ignorance that we're dealing with and what we have to overcome, not only to educate them, our policymakers that represent us, both in terms of domestic policy, but also international human rights, foreign policy, and religious freedom issues. But just educating them on what a Hindu is and then getting Hindu issues into the conversation. For so long, nobody talked about the issues dealing with Hindus in countries such as Pakistan, Bangladesh, and many others. And so the battle that we've been fighting for more than 10 years, and that is so many years to go, is to make sure that these issues take front and center stage on our issues. And I'm saying that not just as a Hindu, as an American, and as somebody whose roots are in Bharat, but also as an American citizen that pays taxes, and to see where my tax dollars are going. I don't want my tax dollars going to a regime in Pakistan that is supporting the oppression of Hindu minorities. So getting that dialogue going, educating our policymakers is the first step in trying to change things. So a little bit about the human rights advocacy work that we do. We publish annual human rights reports that document violations against Hindus globally. And this takes the form of many countries: Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, Saudi Arabia, and many others. We build relations with government officials, and we advocate for policy changes towards countries that persecute Hindus. So I'm not going to talk too much about Bangladesh because my colleague already spoke about that a little bit. But what I do want to say is, in the US, there has been a narrative that has been successfully portrayed by those in Bangladesh that are supporting the repression of minorities and an Islamist rule. Jamaat-e-Islami in particular, has successfully lobbied the US government. They have hired one of the most powerful lobbying firms in the US to advocate and to lobby on behalf of their interests, portraying Jamaat-e-Islami as victims of political repression. But you never hear about the issues that are affecting Hindus. But for the first time last year, we successfully advocated for a congressional hearing on Bangladesh, where the actual focus of the hearing were the rights of Hindu minorities. This hearing was just about the time where there was election violence going on in Bangladesh. And so those issues took center stage. And we actually had one of the most powerful committees, the House Foreign Affairs Committee, one of their subcommittees examining the election violence against Hindus and the role of Jamaat-e-Islami. So this was obviously a long way to go, but one of the first steps in actually getting these issues on the desk of policymakers and having them actively look into it. Another example on a country that we work on is Bhutan. Everybody knows about Bhutan as a country who has exported gross national happiness. But from my Bhutanese Hindu friends, it is a country of gross national hypocrisy. Because in the early 1990s, the Bhutanese government ethnically cleansed more than 100,000 Bhutanese Hindus from the south of Bhutan who are ethnically Nepali and practice Hinduism. There's some small sects of Buddhism also that were affected, but the majority were Hindus. There was an ethnic cleansing campaign that led to the burning of ethnic Nepali Hindu homes, torture, arrests, rape of women, and other atrocities. As a result, these Hindus were forced to flee and were living in United Nations administered refugee camps in Nepal for more than 20 years. For more than 20 years, the Bhutanese government refused to repatriate any of these refugees. Nobody from the international community was able to effectively convince them to repatriate these refugees. In 2007, several countries started to agree to resettle these refugees, and the US was one of them. Now there are nearly 80,000 Bhutanese Hindus living in America. Unfortunately, they have not been able to partake in the American dream. After living through ethnic cleansing and then life in the camps, they now are in the US where they face other challenges, where they have the highest suicide rate for any group in the country, any group in the world. They deal with mental health issues on a regular basis. They deal with language barriers. They deal with economic issues. And these Bhutanese Hindus, for the first time, we were able to give them a platform in the United States government. Earlier this week, on Monday, Hindu American Foundation hosted a Bhutan Advocacy Day on Capitol Hill for Bhutanese Hindus, where we invited Bhutanese Hindu leaders from across the country to advocate on issues for their community that affected them both domestically in the US as well as internationally, making sure that the Bhutanese government seriously takes the repatriation of those Bhutanese Hindus that want to return to Bhutan as an issue on their agenda, that look into the rights of those Hindus that are still remaining in Bhutan. Bhutanese Hindus still cannot worship freely, they cannot build temples freely, they cannot practice their faith freely. The Nepali language has been banned in many schools, and they face a number of other cultural and economic discrimination, a number of other forms of economic and cultural discrimination. And coupled with that Bhutanese Advocacy Day, we held a congressional briefing that we did in collaboration with the chair of the Nepal caucus. We're led by 2 congressmen, 1 Democrat and 1 Republican. We brought to life these issues that were plaguing these Bhutanese Hindus. And one of these Bhutanese Hindus so eloquently stated that he never imagined when he was driven out of Bhutan that he would one day come to the halls of power in America to speak off on behalf of not only Bhutanese in America, but Bhutanese Hindus worldwide. Malaysia in the West is often described as a model Muslim democracy in Southeast Asia. There couldn't be anything farther from the truth. Currently in Malaysia, there's an apartheid system that treats those that are not Muslim Malays differently. Muslim Malays get economic benefits, and they get other legal rights that are not available to the minorities. In particular, the Hindu minority in Malaysia is one of the most economically deprived community in the country. And they face regular discrimination in terms of their religious rights. Their religious rights are restricted. Their temples are destroyed. Since independence, more than 10,000 Hindu temples or shrines have been either destroyed or forcibly relocated under the guise of government development. Now, this does not happen to any other religious community in Malaysia. You don't see Malaysian Muslim mosques being relocated for business development. You only see it happening to Hindu temples. Hindus also face discrimination in terms of marriage rights or in terms of family matters. When there's a situation where a Hindu has been married, and in particular a Hindu woman, and her husband converts to Islam, that wife is then forced to adjudicate in the Sharia Islamic courts the future of their children, because that husband now has the right to convert their children to Islam without permission of the mother. So these are some of the other discrimination and religious restrictions that Hindus face in Malaysia. So what have we been able to do about it? Now, obviously there's still a lot to be done, but we've made some strides in bringing this issue to the attention of US policymakers. We sponsored events for human rights leader of the Hindu Rights Action Force in Malaysia, Wetha Murthy, on Capitol Hill. We've highlighted the plight of Malaysian Hindus with the State Department, with the US Commission on International Religious Freedom, which used to be only focused on Christian rights internationally, with Congress and senators. Again, Pakistan, I won't talk too much about because my colleague has already spoken about it. But just to talk about some of the things that we talked about on Pakistan, when you hear about human rights on Pakistan, Christian groups are very active in the US, both in terms of lobbying and religious freedom forums and in other areas. And they have successfully brought the plight of Christian minorities in Pakistan, which is a fact. Christians are suffering in Pakistan, but they have successfully brought that plight to the attention of policymakers and have effectively been able to raise their cause. Previously, in years past, you would never hear even the mention of Hindus in Pakistan. You may hear about Ahmadiyas, about Christians, but you would never hear about Hindus. So we've hosted multiple congressional briefings on the plight of Hindus in Pakistan. And we've done it in a way that we've done it in collaboration with other organizations. So we make it seem that it's not just a Hindu issue, but it's a general human rights issue in Pakistan. We've had multiple congressmen spearhead letters on the rights of Hindu women in Pakistan, Hindu girls who are forcibly kidnapped and converted to Islam on a monthly basis. And we've forced the State Department to take these issues into consideration in their relations with Pakistan. Now, obviously, a lot of other issues have affected relations between the US and Pakistan, but we're making impacts. We're making impact on the appropriations of money that's going to Pakistan. So when we look at the importance of influencing US policy, a few issues I'd like to highlight, or a few strategies I'd like to highlight. One is working with policy leaders and think tanks to define policy objectives for Hindus. Think tanks and research institutes often define what are the important policy objectives for the policymakers, for those that are in power, for the senators, for the congressmen. So besides going to the halls of Congress and the State Department, meeting with these think tank experts and making sure that they talk about these issues as well. And that then trickles down to what the policymakers are talking about. Advocating for action from government bodies to improve human rights conditions. Unfortunately, human rights often is the last thing that's discussed when it comes to bilateral relations with several countries from the US perspective. So making sure that these issues are constantly discussed and demanding action from government bodies, but couching it in a language that it comes down to the bare US national interest. And finally, coordinating with coalitions to establish broad bases of support for change. And this is important, that we have to find allies wherever we can. We may not agree with them on 100% of the issues, but where we can find common cause with certain organizations or other groups that have suffered similarly to the Hindu community worldwide, we have to form those coalitions. Because once we have a voice and we bring that voice together with other voices, we can only strengthen the voice of our own Hindu brothers and sisters that are suffering around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samir. It's, for us all very encouraging that these young people in Europe, in the United States, are taking on this kind of very adventurous and ambitious kind of agenda and work very hard. And I think many of you here, many of us, we think about human rights. When I said that human rights are not given a great deal of attention by us, I simply meant the human rights movement at the present time that does have an imprint of the West. On human rights, just again, little personal reference, and forgive me for that, but the very first class ever taught on human rights was the one I had the privilege to be at Yale Law School. And at that time, I decided that if I get to teach, I'm going to teach human rights in my own classes. And the second class anywhere in the world was at my own little school at the University of Denver Law School. And the very first human rights clinic was the one that we began in Denver. And so I do understand our own apathy at times to human rights movement, because the West did try to coerce people talking about human rights ad infinitum, and used it against Russia, Soviet Union, used it against developing countries, and simply had its own version of human rights as considered to be appropriate. But who are they to give us any advice about human rights and any lectures about human rights? Because human dignity, human right of the entire world, that has been our own mainstay from the very beginning as part of Hindu values. So I'll say a couple more words about it, but let me introduce to you our third speaker. And I'm very glad that he came. He was not feeling well, and he is Dr. Satyalingam. He's a medical doctor. He has worked for about 18 years, more than 18 years in Sri Lanka and in the conflict region. He was elected to the council in September 2013, and presently he is the Minister of Health in Sri Lanka. And as you know, in Sri Lanka, Hindus, you heard earlier, have not had the understanding from the government of being treated equally and have been persecuted for long. So let's hear from him. Kindly welcome our friend, Dr. Satyalingam.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished guests, fellow brothers and sisters, I stand here today as a medical doctor who witnessed the ravage of war. I am also here today as one of the representatives of the people of North Province in Sri Lanka, a region which is home to 80% of Hindus in Sri Lanka, and a region which is borne full brunt of civil war for over 3 decades. As the Minister of Health, who has the unviable task of nurturing back a highly traumatized group of people who are struggling to recover from the dire effects of civil war, where a firm political solution still remains a mirage, I thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to you. The suffering of our people is not something new to many of you. You are here today. In fact, in 1998, at the first International Conference on Hindu Solidarity held in Paris, an occasion which was attempted by BJP and VHP officials, the plight of my people was featured heavily, with the resolution condemning the attacks perpetrated by the Sri Lankan security forces on Hindus and Hindu temples. Similarly, as the war ended in 2009, leaving behind dire humanitarian consequences, the meeting of the Central Governing Council of Vishwa Hindu Parishad held at Banswara, Rajasthan in July 2009, urged the government of Sri Lanka to address the humanitarian crisis in the comprehensive manner, while impressing upon the need to work towards a political solution to address the ethnic problem in Sri Lanka. In fact, that the Central Governing Council aptly captured within 2 months of the end of the war the suffering of more than 300,000 internally displaced persons who were confined to military administered refugee camps. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for standing by our people and lending them your moral and political support at the time of our greatest need. The bond that exists today between us was not one forged in the past decades or so. It is ancient. We share more than religious roots. Our people's culture, their language, and way of life is deeply rooted in this land. At times, we have also shared common challenges as during the time of colonialism, which in many ways structured the existence of our people, laid the seeds of conflict, and whose effects are felt to this day. Amid such turbulent periods, champions of religion, language, and culture have emerged to protect our culture and identity. Armuga Navalar, who spearheaded Hindu revival in the mid-19th century among the Tamil Hindus who considered Northeast as their home during the dark period under British rule, come to my mind. Described by great men of his time as the Hindu of Hindus, Navalar was credited with stonewalling missionary efforts to spread Protestant Christianity and prevailing the religious and cultural identity of the Tamil people. Although Navalar's life began in Jaffna, he worked on both sides of the Park Straits in mission for Hindus revival. He crossed the Park Straits and went to Madras to look at Saiva schools, meet scholars, and draw inspiration from the religious leaders of that time. But that is not all. He made Madras and Jaffna the twin centers for his reforms. To the printing press he set up in Jaffna, he added one in Madras. The Saiva school he established in Vannarpanai, Jaffna, was matched by one in Chidambaram, Tamil Nadu, and so went his mission for Hindu revival. 137 years since the passing of Navalar, today our people face a life that Navalar would not have never imagined. After having faced entrenched structural discrimination, state-sponsored violation since independence in 1948, and a brutal civil war, Tamil people of North and East, regardless of their religion, language, or culture, face a changed political, economic, and socio-cultural environment. The war did not spare the places of worship. The Ministry of Hindu Religion and Cultural Affairs data on damages to temples in the north and the east of Sri Lanka says, out of the 1,607 temples registered with the ministry, 1,479 have suffered severe damage due to the military activities. This is 1998 data. It is more than 80% of the registered temples. Other sources of data list the number of temples completely destroyed, which is nearly 250. In addition to the physical damage, the religious institutions also faced another troubling phenomenon, that was the theft and smuggling of religious artifacts, many of which were centuries old and even survived colonial onslaughts, and the loss of Sanskrit scriptures and records dating back hundreds of years. Beyond the physical damage suffered by these religious institutions, the war also prevented the conduct of religious observances and festivals, as embargo on travel, food, fuel, electricity supply, and dust-down curfew stifled normal life. I must say at this juncture that the attacks against places of cultural and religious significance is a phenomenon that has remained a constant in post-colonial Sri Lanka. In this instance, it is fitting to recall the destruction of Jaffna Public Library in 1981 by the state-sponsored mobs, well before the start of civil war in Sri Lanka, and the loss of 95,000 volumes of rare, historical, culturally important, ancient manuscripts, which has been deprived for future generation. On the same day, the mobs also burned down the Hindu temple adjacent to the library. Both were symbols of our people. While the physical impact of the war is measurable and could be addressed with the availability of capital and human resource, the psychosocial scars of the war are not measurable and cannot be addressed within the particular time frames. They are enduring and non-identifiable. According to the report produced by the End Peace Network, UNDP initiative titled Women's Perspectives of Peace and Security, the war has left around 86,000 widows in the north and the east of Sri Lanka. In addition to the war widows, there is a category of women who do not know whereabouts their husbands, as the large number of men who surrendered in the last stages of war still remain missing, as many who are subjected to white van abductions. Added to the above, we also have around 12,000 ex-combatants who surrendered in the last stages of war and subjected to a government-designed rehabilitation program which did not adhere to accepted international norms and practices on disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration of ex-combatants. According to UN and NGO sources, the war had also cost more than 40,000 to 60,000 lives in the large stages of war, with 13,000 more injured. Many of the injured are disabled at present. Added to that, as of February 2014, according to the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, which is part of the Norwegian Refugee Council, 90,000 people are still living in the internal displacement, and most of them with host communities. The issue of post-war northern and eastern provinces are further compounded by the vast area of land being taken by the military to further expand their infrastructure, leaving behind thousands who are unable to exercise their right to return to their original place of habitation, contrary to the accepted international conventions and norms. As reported by various media outlets, more than 7,000 square kilometers of land in the war-torn regions have been seized by the government for its own use. These lands include temples which are sacred to our people. Added to it, as per calculation made by the International Crisis Group in March this year, around 120,000 military personnel are stationed in our province, and went on to say that figure presents one army member for every 8.7 civilians. You are wonder why these facts and figures are matter. They matter because the effects of war do not end when the war comes to an end for official purpose. The physical, human, political, social determinants continue for years or even across generations. They matter because it shows that the civil war acts of rape and sexual violence, which still remains endemic and highlighted by the Freedom House in 2013 and UNHRC in 2010, especially against women and girls, are in the former conflict areas, keep our female population who bore a brunt of war in the permanent state of trauma. These traumatized groups are in desperate need of psychosocial care, livelihood assistance, safe and security to lead the normal life. Unfortunately, the highly militarized nature of the northern province is not at all conducive to ensure their livelihood, safety and security. In the northern province of Sri Lanka, there are three groups of most vulnerable population living in the north and east. Especially there are more than 78,000 young widows who are actually unable to live because they have any support from anyone, and they find even to meet the day-to-day needs with their 3 or 4 kids. and also other group of people actually living in Sri Lanka in the northern east provinces who lost their husbands, and also other group of people actually who does not know where their husbands are still. They are waiting for their loved ones to return to their homes. And also there are more than 18,000 people with special need. Actually, they have nothing, they have no program for their for their future. And actually, this is only 11 minutes allocated for me. This is not the matter to discuss whatever the problems we have in Sri Lanka, especially for the Hindus. Anyway, I would like to again tell you the things actually we have to. I have never seen when the Hindus were discussed, the problems of Hindus were discussed, nobody mentioned about Sri Lanka. In future, at least, I think we have to take care of the Hindus in Sri Lanka. Thank you very much.
Sir, chairing this session, I feel very awkward because each one has got a story to tell. And they have not been able to do that because we couldn't do justice to them. And now I have 12 minutes to talk about Romas and Yazidis. And I'm not going to do that because I think we have heard enough about the suffering and about the anguish and about the pain and about the needs and about inaction. And the point simply is, what do we do? Because that should be our focus, not simply pain and suffering. I want to just mention to you, I don't think I'll go into any details. I've got a lot of them here. But Yazidis, you have heard about them. How many of you have heard about Yazidis? And some of you haven't even heard. And I am not going to embarrass you, but in all your life, those who are sitting here, and I know that here there are many of you, I know Dattaji, I know Sumitraji, and I know how much they are concerned about human rights, but I do know that many of you are, but how many of you have ever done anything about the human rights of Hindus abroad? And I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 15, 10 to 12 hands out of this group, and I am so delighted to see that all of you are here. And that simply gives me an indication that we know the problem. And the problem, if I tell you about these, very briefly about these Roma, because you have heard about them. They left India about 1400 years ago. They are at the present time spread all over Europe, Romania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, now Czech and Slovak Republic, Hungary, Italy, France, all over the world. And what is the difficulty with them? Again, I don't need to go into all the details, but from housing to education to their children malnourished, all kinds of problems that they are facing from housing, evictions, persecution, saying that they are inferior people. And you probably do recall that the Nazis not simply persecuted them, but sent them to all those extermination camps, saying that they are inferior people, they don't have the right to live. And they have been asking the European Union, are we animals? Don't we have some rights? And what is happening about Roma and about people, Yazidis? Today, Hindus have taken pride in order to assist them. Seva International in the United States. Vishwa Hindu Parishad people have met them. Shri Shri Ravi Shankar is at the present time in Erbil, that is the Kurdish capital. And they came to see him, Yazidis, in the United States, and he said he would travel to Erbil to talk with them. In Houston, our own people had Diwali function and had brought them there. And that has happened all over the country. We just heard about Bhutan, and I simply say a word about Bhutan. Seva International, Hindu Swayamsevak Sangh, Vishwa Hindu Parishad, all of them have been active in the United States in many cities in order to see that these brothers and sisters from Bhutan are helped. I need to tell you, I'm sorry to tell you, I'm ashamed and embarrassed to tell you, we don't have the resources. We have, at the present time, in my little place of Denver, and people who are in Hindu Swayamsevak Sangh, a few of us have been working very hard in order to assist them, but can't. They need employment. They need resources. There are churches that have got millions of dollars, and those churches are able to get them, reach them, meet them, try to convert them, and we are the ones who go back to them, talk with them, bring them to our temples, and then they say, we need jobs. We need health insurance. We need resources. We don't have them. And so that is the kind of setting in which we find at the present time Bhutanese. But anyway, we, in my own little place, I run a human rights clinic, and since they have been working in Europe about Roma, about others, we have not done a whole lot on Roma. But this year we are doing a petition to the European Union because European Union has decided that in their own budget from 2014 to 2020, they are going to have $22 billion put aside for minorities. And what my students and I are doing is sending a note to the European Union, making a legal case petition, because Europe has a High Commissioner for Minorities. Europe has a convention on minorities. These minorities suffer all over, and they are not taken care of at all. In France, in Italy, they are evicted. Anyway, I just wanted to let you know that we have done that, and I want to tell my friend from Sri Lanka that we did a petition to the United Nations in order to see that Sri Lankan government is charged with crimes against humanity for all that they have done. You probably know or don't know that after all that persecution, after the war that my friend talked with you about, thousands upon thousands of people, Hindus, they were killed, they were suffering, and they still are suffering, as he said to you. And we ask that these people who committed those crimes, perpetrated those crimes, they must be found guilty, they must be found accountable for that. No impunity at all. And I think in those cliche terms, we do want to say that you can run, but you cannot hide. We'll come after you. And that is what at the present time we have asked the United Nations to do. Some of you probably know that the United Nations Council has asked Sri Lankan government initially to take action. It hasn't. Now the government, not having taken action, is accountable in the international arena. And they did ask the council, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court in The Hague, to pursue to see if there is a possibility of charges against them. And I hope that that will happen. And on Yazidis, let me simply mention to you one word, and that is that they were at one time 23 million. Today they are not even a million. And 500,000 of them are in exile. They had to leave that part that is in Kurdistan, close to Turkey, in Sinjal mountain. And as you probably have heard about their little villages next to Kurdistan that have been at the present time under a great deal of attack. And what has again happened is, these are the people who believe in reincarnation. They are close to Hindus. Many of them feel that they came from Bharat. And at the present time, Hindus do feel very close to them. Many weeks ago, in August when it happened, I had heard from our own Hindu brothers and sisters that we need to do something about them. And at that time, with a few other international law professors, we sent a note to the President and to White House that they ought to do something about these people who are suffering. I'm very pleased to tell you it's not probably that we did that, because many other people did the same thing probably, but on 28th October, White House did issue a statement about Yazidis. At the present time, the United States has taken an action in order to see that Yazidis would not face that kind of persecution. Airstrikes in that area, trying to save them from that Sinjar mountain, and all those efforts had been taken in order to do that. I have plenty of things about all that. I'm not going to do that. But I think at the end, as I said, we don't like what the movement had done. But do not throw the baby with the water. Because the important thing is that we need to find effective ways to deal with it. How do we do it? Until now, the government of India was not willing to do that. It still has constraints in the international arena. I understand, you understand geopolitical considerations. They are not able to do much. But at the same time, as institutions in India, where at the present time we have think tanks, Dattaji has done wonderful work in creating those kind of think tanks. Sumitraji is doing wonderful work in the United States to start at least a small think tank. But at the same time, here, as institutions, we need to put human rights on the forefront. How come that ethnic cleansing anywhere in the world is topmost news on the front pages? And these are always Muslims and Christians. What about all those Kashmiri Hindus? What about all those Pakistani Hindus? What about all those Bangladeshi Hindus? I do not want self-flagellation. We don't need all the time to be feeling sorry for ourselves, and pity and misery needs company, so all of us feel the same way. I think I want to see that there is uplifting kind of feeling about it. As institutions, we take action. As Bharat, we take action. It's not a job simply sitting in The Hague and sitting in Washington to fight for Hindus around the world. We don't have the resources, we don't have the manpower, human power. Sitting all there, we'll do our very, very best what we can do. But we need you, we need our friends, brothers and sisters in this country to be worried about, not simply about human rights, but to find a way. I don't know what that way is. I wish I knew that. But I do know that Bharat and Bharatiya government, and I do know that Bharat and Bharatiya institutions, they can do a heck of a lot more than what is being done. And I want them to do that. If you feel, sitting in this room, that institutions ought to take this kind of action, can you raise your hands? Wonderful, wonderful. Dattaji saw that. Every hand is up, Dattaji. I want you to know that. And I think tomorrow, when the time is come for me to sum it up about what happened in the session, I'm going to say simply that what happened in the session is that everyone, almost everyone, raised their hands that institutions in this country, and this not simply Sangh and VHP, there are plenty of institutions. There are temples. There are all these ashrams. There are all these Hindu institutions. They are the ones who are to be worried about it. I heard earlier about rituals. I think they are wonderful. We need them. Rituals with essence, rituals with substance, rituals with values, fine. At the same time, all that we do in temples It's so wonderful, we need it. But human rights are important too. Our brothers and sisters in other countries, they need help. They have gone there. We didn't send them, but they are there. They are ours. They need to be protected. They need to feel that they are part of this, again, wonderful Hindu entity. And we need to take care of them. And so that's all that I have to say to you. I know it's 12:30. I know that we need to go. It's more than that. But I'm going to have you kindly stay. We are not going to have any questions, not having any comments. But I'm going to have two people say a few more words. One is a friend from Assam who feels very strongly that Hindu culture, Hindu entity is being submerged at the present time because of all those infiltrators. And the other, Swamiji from Bangladesh, who earlier said wanted to say something, and I read a few things, but I do want him to say something. So those two kindly indulge me. You got to listen to them. I'm going to ask them to take only 2 or 3 minutes each. I took a long time, but I have that anguish and pain in my own heart. I needed to say that. And so you forgive me for taking that time, but I'm going to ask these two people to come and go. Swamiji, why don't you come? So kindly indulge me. They are going to take a couple minutes each, and then you can go to lunch. I know one thing, that anyone who stands between lunch and them is a fool. And I'm not very bright, but I don't belong in that category, so I'm going to let you go pretty soon, but go Swamiji.
Thank you, sir. Respected President, honorable guests and speakers in the dais, and my respected pupils present in the munch. I am going to draw an attention about the Assamese people and the people of Assam. Actually, and Hindus, they are facing so many problems there. You are discussing about the human rights violation in broad, but now, after 10 to 15 years, I think you will discuss about the Hindu peoples of Assam, those who are going to be minorities in Assam. At a duty, my Bangladeshi friend, Mr. I don't know his name, he has given reports about the violation of Hindus, human rights violation in Bangladesh. But in Assam, I want to say something about Assam. Actually, I am going to draw your attention about more than 900 Satra institutions of Assam. These Satra institutions, human rights in case of Satra's institution of Assam has been jeopardized, rather strongly violated. Actually, we the Hindus of Assam are going to be minority in Assam as well as in northeast Bharat. We are representing 5 Satras. Our Honorable Satra Adhikar of Kamalabari Satra Majuli, you have heard about Majuli, river island, great river island of the world. Janardhan Deva Goswami Prabhu is present here. He is our leader, and other 4 Satradhikaras are representing here. I am going to about the Satras, how Satras are going on there, and how human rights has been violated there. Just a few minutes. Yes. The Satra Institute of Assam was established by the great Vaishnava Gurus of Assam, mainly Mahapurusha Sri Sri Shankaradeva and Sri Sri Madhavdeva, to spread the Vaishnavism in the northeast as well as to preserve the great teachings of Mahapurushas, especially in the field of culture, which includes Ankiya Bhavana and Satriya Nittas, which are already recognized as national asset of the, and they have been also been adored internationally. For the last few years, these Satras have fallen under the encouragement by suspected immigrants from Bangladesh and are under fear of losing existence. The infiltrators getting indulgence from the state governments after independence who use them as vote bank have threatened to occupy the entire states of Satras. Under such a situation, appeals are made many a time and often to the state government, which proved cries in the wilderness. And in this connection, a case was filed for the Honorable High Court of Guwahati, and the court has ordered eviction notices against the illegal immigrants, number so and so. But the Assam government has not taken any action, thus defying the court order. It may be mentioned that in the historic Assam Accord in 1985, it was clearly stated in a clause to ensure protection and preservation of the Satras. But these are all in vain. Illegal immigrants, most of them those belongs to Muslim communities, have also always entered through Indo-Bangladesh border, free border, and easily encroached Satra states as Gulf lands and forest lands without getting any resistance from Gulf mercenaries. They have also been stolen many valuable idols, gold, money in cash, besides religious as well as historical based manuscripts written in Sasipato, which have either been stolen or destroyed. In case of preservation of Central Gulf, has provided financial assistance to some of the Satras through state gov as per their selected list, but it is all vain. Mainly this is the problem of the Satras in Assam. You should think and discuss about the problem, how can we deal with it. With the Satras, I am principal secretary of some Satra Mahasabha, which is the organization of 900 Satras, Satra Institutes of Assam. Thank you.
Mananiya moderator and our Pujaniya Vedanandaji and our Adaraniya Sadhanandaji and others and all delegates. With head and heart, I salute God in you. You see, I told you earlier, the reactionary forces in Bangladesh after 71, if you see in your inner eyes the gravity of Hindu in Bangladesh, reactionary forces committing looting, arson, damage and destroyed and deformed innumerable deities and temples throughout Bangladesh. It started from 1975. About 10,000 temples are demolished and about 3 crores 50 lakhs Hindu exodized to Bharat in 18 provinces. There is a record, and it is also found in the website. The forces committed the same crimes, including rape and ruined 3,600 temples in connection with Korsaba and Babri structure in 89, 90 and 92. This time they are not sparing women and children even. The commission of crimes is the most humiliating and shameful phenomenon in the history of civilization. Actually, the social condition of Hindu is most worst in the history of civilization. Hindu monks, priests do feel more publicly out of fear and life and honor. Government always shouting that Bangladesh is the best type of communal harmony, which is a dire falsehood. Actually, state stepmotherly attitudes is towards in the non-Muslim, particularly in Hindu. No minister in the cabinet, no government officer or constitutional post. There is no Hindu. Only there are servant, sweeper, keeper, and some other clerk in the year. But before 61, we are so many thousand Jomidar and king in that region. So, human rights organization should come forward to see the actual happening in the country. And I am very much glad I see our Sadhananda Shitalji. I went Netherlands in 2006. I told everything, and sometimes I sent some report also. So my humble request, the World Hindu Congress should open a desk particularly for Bangladesh.
And meeting, sitting, eating, it is everything. Last 30 years I am looking. The only meeting, sitting and eating. There is no money follow-up. So I appreciate our Vedanandaji, what he predicted. I think that he can do anything and everything. So I don't like to disturb you. Thank you very much.
Your patience is not inexhaustible, and I know that, and I deeply, deeply appreciate that. And I have just one information, and that is that I think there is plenty of time. It's not even 1, and you have to be back by 2:15. But before you leave, could you kindly accept my deepest and humble gratitude for being here? Because I look at the entire house full, and when we began, I didn't know how many people might show up. But that shows the interest, that shows the concern, and that shows the sympathy, not apathy, for all that is happening around the world. Kindly join me in sincerely and gratefully thanking my colleagues, and kindly talk with them. I'm sorry we didn't have any questions, answers, or your comments, but please, please, please talk with them and tell them if you like what they are doing. Do tell them, because they need encouragement. They have done a whole lot of work, and as they go back to their organizations, they need to tell them that people in Bharat appreciate what we are doing for Bharatiyas around the world. And again, my simple plea to all of us, in whatever fashion we can do, this litany of misery and anguish and suffering and pain, we can talk about it ad infinitum, but we need to do something about it. I wish I knew what. I don't, but at the same time, I do know that here there are hearts and there are minds and there are brains that have got great deal of fertility and can do a whole lot, and I hope that we do it. Thank you very much.